Greetings, traveler. Often we talk about imbalance in games being a bad thing, but sometimes it can be fun as well. Today we're going to have a look at how imbalance can be fun in single-player games. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 10 years now, and when I was playing Total War Warhammer, I noticed this conversation online about how in single player the game features many overpowered elements and they get progressively even more overpowered as you continue your campaign, and that element doesn't exist when you play the same game in multiplayer mode. However, when you play that overpowered, so to speak, single player campaign, you don't feel that you're not having fun. You don't feel negatively because of that overpower elements. Instead, you enjoy it. So today we're going to have a look a bit more specifically at how this happens and why it's fun. So we're going to talk about what perfect balance is in a game to set the frame for this discussion. Then we're going to talk about how it's not necessary to have this perfect balance in every single player game. And finally, when using this approach of using balance in a more liberal and fun way in single player games, what the pitfalls of this approach are and how we can avoid them. So let's begin with perfect balance. The way we define it for this conversation is, let's say there's two characters in a game and they both use the same stats to describe each other. And in their stats, they have a total of points that's the same for both characters. So in this case, 7 points in total between these stats for character 1, the same 7 points in total between these three stats for the second character. Now, we can see the balance being, so to speak, perfect here because these two characters have the same points, right? So one character is better at attack, the other character is better at magic, but overall they have the same amount of points between them. That being said, if we have the case of the imperfect balance, we have this character here who's good at magic being way better at magic than character 1 is at attack. So if you count their points, clearly this character has more. Yet, in this case, in a single player game, this can be fun. How could this be? Well, if you think about it, this character here, let's take a fantasy sword and shield and magic kind of game as a base. This character would predominantly attack with his sword and shield and so on, be very melee focused, while this character would likely be a wizard throwing fireballs and so on. Well, why wouldn't it matter in this case if this character is way stronger than this character? Both of them need to attack to deal damage. Both of them need to use what they're good at to deal damage. Both of them can defeat enemies in this scenario. So it doesn't really matter that this character here will have to do more attacks with, let's say, his sword and shield to defeat the enemies versus this character having to throw a few fireballs, because ultimately both characters are using their strong points and both characters can defeat enemies. Both characters can advance in the game at more or less the same pace. And here you might be thinking, well, what if this character advances way faster than that one? That's one of the pitfalls. We'll come to that in a second. But assuming that's not the case, then both characters advance, both characters are having fun in the game. And since we're talking about a single player game, then if you choose to play with character 2 first, or character 2 is the only character you ever use in this game, you will actually never know that character 1 has this difference in the way he attacks and how he deals damage and so on. Assuming, and this goes the other way around as well, right? If you only used character 1 and you enjoy this sword and shield gameplay, you would never care that character 2 actually does more damage with his attacks. You simply wouldn't know about it. What you would care way more about is whether you can advance the game at a good pace and have a good gameplay experience with character 1. So that's, in a nutshell, how you can enjoy this imperfect balance, despite the fact that these two characters can be quite different and quite out of balance with each other. So specifically, because in single player games there are no other human players, we have one less element to worry about when we're thinking about balance. If this were a multiplayer game and we had to go head to head with the unbalanced player, or we were the unbalanced player, then this might reduce the enjoyment of the game. But since there's no other players in the game, we only have to be concerned with the enjoyment of the main player of the game. And as long as that player is having fun, well, anything goes. That's the whole point of playing games. So let's take a look at a couple of pitfalls. So first of all, when you're using this approach of liberally making a weapon overpowered, making a game feature overpowered, a spell, and so on, but knowingly doing so in order to have fun in the game and perhaps change the pace of the game a little bit, this is one of the pitfalls that might happen. So if the enemies are using this approach and they have an attack or something that the player cannot do, let's say the enemies can use magic and the player can't, well, that's a case of imperfect game balance if their attacks are too strong. The player might feel that the enemies are cheating. The player might feel that they always get defeated by this one move the enemies do, and when the player is defeated, they feel that it's because of the enemy's particularly strong attack. While if you think about games like Monster Hunter or Dark Souls and so on, always these games feature enemies that have super strong attacks. It's basically an unspoken rule of a boss monster, that the boss monster has some attacks that are just extremely powerful and the player is not supposed to fight against them. Against those moves, the player is supposed to dodge it and launch a counter attack. That's typically the case. However, here the player feels that, well, this move always defeats me, so this game is not fun. So in this case, the reason why the player feels so is perhaps in most cases because the player is not aware of the counter tools at his character's disposal. So of course the character cannot counter punch the boss's punch or the enemy's overpowered punch, but presumably the player character has tools in his arsenal of their own to use to deal with this situation. But still, this complaint comes along. So that means that the player is not aware of these tools. So what we can do as game designers is educate and illustrate multiple times, and I really want to stress that multiple times, that each enemy move can be countered and how. So by that I mean this could be a tutorial that you show in the game. This could be enemies that slowly build up the player's skill at certain things, so the player can slowly understand what the tools in his disposal are capable of. This could be enemies using the same abilities as the player on each other to illustrate to the player what these moves are capable of, what these features are capable of, or how these weapons are used, and so on. And then the player can see, okay, if they can do it, probably I can do it as well. So it's important to illustrate multiple times that the game mechanics work in this way, and in multiple scenarios, multiple angles. So it doesn't have to be always the player doing it. It could be the enemies doing it. It could be a purpose-built tutorial showing this move. It could be a hint in a conversation with an NPC talking about the special strength of this move and so on. So the more ways we can illustrate it and demonstrate it inside the game, the easier it is for the player to remember it going forward. And let's not forget that people play games whenever they have free time. So maybe they'll play the game today. Maybe the next time they play is going to be in 7 months from now, or 3 years or something. So maybe they remember the general controls of the game, but the finer points, of course, they will have forgotten. So it's never a waste of time to remind the player of all the things they can do in subtle ways and in different ways every time. The other pitfall of game imbalance in this way is when the player uses these overpowered features, they make the game feel too easy. So imagine a game where there's stronger and stronger weapons as you progressively go through the game. Eventually, let's say you find a weapon that just defeats everything. And it could be purposely so, right? It could be this super holy magical weapon that's supposed to be very strong. But if everything in the game is defeated easily, then that drops the engagement of the player. That makes the game feel not challenging. The players might complain, saying everything just dies in one hit. So when the player feels that, it feels like there's no challenge left in this game, and perhaps it's time to move on. So why does this happen? Well, the imbalance in this feature is just too severe. So when we want to create a weapon or a spell or an ability, a feature in general that is supposed to be markedly stronger than all the ones before it or all the other choices, because we want to make a point of the story around this feature, or how good it is, or perhaps the fact that the player worked extra hard to get it, so the player needs to be rewarded. We solve this situation by bringing the stats closer to the other features in the game. So if we're talking about weapons, then this weapon doesn't have to be 10 times as strong as anything else. Actually, it's enough for us to adjust the balance to the point where this overpowered feature that we designed is at most 50% stronger than all the other contemporary choices of the player at that point. So making it 50% stronger, again, this is already quite extreme, but it's enough to demonstrate that this perhaps end game weapon or special weapon or special ability is indeed nothing like anything else because it's so much stronger, while at the same time keeping the rest of the game in a relative challenge. It doesn't completely remove any challenge from the rest of the game. So playing this little numbers game here can achieve both goals. We can keep the overpowered ability in the game, and we can show off how cool it is, and at the same time we don't have to sacrifice overall game balance and enjoyment just to show off this one feature. So that's it for Imbalance for single player games. If you're interested in Imbalance in multiplayer games, you can check out the video that's coming up on your screen right now. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this, and as always, have fun.